Hey, what's up, everybody? We are live again. Keystroke Medium here. Josh Hayes here with my co-host Scott Moon.
That's me. I'm over here, Scott Moon. Sorry, my bad.
We are here with Ben Hale. He is a YA author, and we didn't have any technical difficulties this morning, aside from figuring out which email Ben had, which was my fault and not his fault. So. Welcome.
Most of our difficulties were lighting this morning, but that's all worked out now.
Yes.
Right.
Luckily, we figured those out before the show started.
Yeah, we only started at like 8. Anyways, so go ahead. I interrupted again. My bad.
No, it's all right. Welcome, Ben. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
We got hooked up on this show. It was Scott's idea, but you guys met at the Smarter Artists Summit. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing, just to start us off?
Sure. So I was a reluctant writer. In school, junior high, high school, college even, I really disliked writing. I can recall getting assigned a 15-page paper late in my program, getting my degree, and thinking, please let this be double-spaced, and can it be 14-size font? I really disliked writing. It was not something I thought I was good at. It was not something that was my skill set. And but I had a story that I thought of for a long time, and my wife encouraged me to write it. Long story short, and so I started writing it. And 3.5 years, 4 years later, I started publishing them. I had 3 books written. 6 months later, I was earning more than my business was. And so since then, I've sold over 100,000 copies. I have 13 books out now, and I've eaten my words, so to speak. So it's awesome. I write full-time. I coach other writers. I set up a company that's geared towards helping them do that. I'm just started a master's program, and it's the best job ever. It's awesome.
You mentioned that you're reluctantly came into writing.
Yes.
I think that you're the first person to ever use that phrase, reluctant writing or reluctant writer. Why was it reluctant? Did you start off? I mean, a lot of writers say, "Oh, I was born a writer. I have to write." What made you start to write? What piqued your interest in creating?
So I've always been more creative-minded, growing up anyway, and so I did. I mean, I learned how to ballroom dance and swing dance. I even break danced. I like to just do anything. I like to snowboard and play chess and board games and video games and movies and
learn languages.
I'm fluent in Portuguese, decent in Spanish. I'd like to learn more, which is an odd fact for a short white redhead guy. It's really uncommon, but I really enjoy exploring and doing new things, and so.
Did you pick up those languages when you're kind of doing some traveling, and I saw you did some work?
I did a Mormon mission in Brazil. So if you've ever seen a Mormon missionary walking around, that was me in Brazil, where it's extremely hot. Yeah. So in a nutshell, writing was something that I just didn't think I could do, and I think it stems back to all my grammar lessons in junior high and thinking, yeah, this is not something I enjoy doing, nor am I good at. But I did have a story that I used to fall asleep. It was literally my tool to fall asleep. So I'd think about this story, and it would let me relax, and I'd fall asleep. I started doing it when I was 12, and every night I would just add a piece to this story and keep adding a piece to this story, and I didn't know until much later that I was basically outlining a world and characters and a plot and all of this stuff. And I did it every night pretty much for 15 years until my wife, I'd been married for about 1.5 years, and she was like, how do you fall asleep so fast? Because I'd be asleep. If I brushed my teeth before she did, I'd be asleep before she got in bed. So she was like, how do you fall asleep so fast? And I was like, oh, I've got this story. It's really good at falling asleep. And so she asked me to share it, thinking it would help her fall asleep. And it took me 4 days to just tell her the story. It was so big, and I was really surprised how big it had gotten. And so she was like, I think you should write this. And initially I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. I can't do that. And that's where the reluctance comes in. I was like, that's way beyond me. But as a good wife, she encouraged me, and the rest, as they say, is history.
It seems like a pretty good example to say you should always write for yourself and then worry about the audience later. So that's a really good example. I mean,
oh, yeah. When I started writing it, I had no intention of publishing, no intention of, trying to connect with anyone. I was just writing a story I was passionate about that I'd seen 100 times, and so that was it.
How many books has that story developed into? Because I see you got a bunch of them on your Amazon page.
Well, the world and the universe that I'm trying to do, I hope to span around 40 books when I'm done.
Oh, wow.
It'll be around 9 smaller series that all connect into an overarching timeline. It's all in the same universe. It's all in the same world.
Is that the Luminea?
Luminea. Yeah, the Chronicles of Luminea.
So since you speak 3 languages, does that help you with some of your linguistics in your stories? Like
tremendously. And name creation and things like that. Yeah, it's very beneficial. The interesting thing about the world is I wanted to cross genres. So you've got epic fantasy that, it's like Lord of the Rings in Middle Earth, and you've got modern fantasy that's like Harry Potter in modern day Earth. And I wanted to bridge the gap. I wanted to make one the history of the other, make it as if Middle Earth evolves into actual Earth. And so that's what my series does. It covers Luminea is actually Earth, but Luminea is kind of like the epic fantasy name, and that's what the magical community, that's what they know it as, is it's Luminea.
That's cool.
But over 10,000 years, it evolves into modern day, current day Earth.
That's cool. I try to do the same thing with bringing Lord of the Rings into modern day. I try to name all my children Frodo, and I got a lot of pushback from the wife every time. So
hey, that's one of those things, At least you did try Sauron. I mean.
Yeah, that might have been kind of braining them for kind of a not so pleasant future.
Right.
Senator Sauron.
Right. Well, I have 5 kids, so I totally know naming and how that impacts them.
Yeah, I have 4 kids, and they're all gone right now. That's why my house is unusually quiet. It's amazing.
So with Luminea, that series, you mentioned that it's young adult. When we talked yesterday, you mentioned layered writing as how you like to describe your fiction. Can you explain a little bit about what you call layered writing?
Okay, so in my experience as a reader, so back when I used to read a lot, and I still do read some, not as much as I'd like, but whenever you're reading a book, if the plot, if the complexities of the story, if the nuances are all really one layer, and by one layer I mean that it appeals to a single audience. So like if it's a mother is the point of view and the entire story is about a mom dealing with mom issues, then it's one layer geared towards moms. If you've got multiple facets in the story that might appeal to teenagers, youth, fathers, then it starts to become multi-layered, and you've got different dimensions of the story that will appeal to different age groups, different genders, just regardless of where they stand. Harry Potter is an excellent example of a YA book that has layers to it. There's a ton of adults that love Harry Potter. And that's because there's elements to that appeal and resonate with adults, even though it's technically a children's YA book. And the series, there's things that really resonate with us.
So I guess my question is, and maybe both of you can answer some of this, if you're wanting to write something that's layered, is that something that happens through following the story naturally, or do you strive for the layers, or is there some way you plan it out? This is going to lead into, a lot of times we'll talk about process. So when you're trying to get your layered story, is this something you do intentionally, or what do you think? What's the good place to start?
It's 50-50. Part of it is intentional and part of it is the story. So if you want to tell the story, let's see, I have a friend of mine who is a mom and wrote a story titled Not Easily Broken. And it was a story, she lost a child, a really young child, and it nearly broke her. It was really hard, and I can only imagine how hard that'd be to go through. And that's really geared towards moms in that similar situation. So if you're going to set out to write something, part of it is the story that you're writing naturally appeals to a certain audience. Fantasy, for example, or if you're going to write romance, you're appealing to a certain audience. But if you want it to resonate beyond that, it comes down into how you write the auxiliary characters. So if you're writing Harry Potter and it's, him and he's a kid, but the complexities of like Vernon, Uncle Vernon, is such a good character, even though he's kind of an antagonist. He's such a good character that all of us adults, we know men like that are like fixed in their ways. And so the auxiliary characters bring that to life in a way that is incredible and make it resonate, because we can understand how Harry might feel living under someone like that, because we know men like that. Right. Whereas another story that isn't really as good with layered writing is like Percy Jackson. The Percy Jackson series it's all about the kid and the interaction. Like the mom is there, but
it's she's plot driven. It sounds like it's kind of down by the numbers towards the big cinematic climax.
Correct. The three-dimensional side characters is what brings the story. It adds those dimensions, it adds those layers, and makes it a resounding success. So I have one book. It's my fourth book. It's written from a mother's perspective, and all of her motivations are geared towards the kids and her children and why she's doing it. But like the action, the intensity, the things that she goes through. There's another point of view that is called the Hunter, and he's tracking her, and he's very, very good at what he does. And he's incredible. Like he's an elf that they call Longblade, and he never loses a query. Like he's just exceptional at what he does. And he goes up against all of these things that the mother goes through, and he does it like it's easy. And so teenagers will really appreciate the dual, perspectives. They'll enjoy multiple facets. They'll enjoy the intensity and the action, and they won't necessarily get the motherhood side of things.
Right.
As long as they're still engaged in the story and they get their layer out of it.
Exactly.
So with the characters that you mentioned, and fleshing out secondary and tertiary characters, do you spend a lot of time in development I call it pre-writing, developing these characters beforehand, or do they come out through your writing?
I'm a planner. I outline extensively. I have spreadsheets of timelines and everything because of what I want to cover. Ultimately, I want to cover so many points in time spread out that it covers 50,000 years, that you can track the impact of major wars and events across a massive timeline. That's what I want to do. And so to do that, I do outline extensively. And for characters, making a character three-dimensional means giving them more than one role. So a mom isn't just a mom. She could be a warrior. She could be, she could have a problem with, ale, drinking, if it's a fantasy thing.
Right.
So you give them more facets to their personality, and that's what makes them strong. So in my third series that I published last fall, it's on rock trolls. And in most fiction, rock trolls are mindless. They're just,
brutes,
basically.
Brutes. Yeah.
And in my series, they call themselves the Flesh of War. It's actually the first of that series. And the main character fights for honor. And he's raised in a society that they believe every other race, their purpose in living is to die by their hand. So they're brutal. They get a tattoo for every kill. They're so geared towards conflict, but they're very intelligent. And this one character, he's all about honor. So he's an incredible warrior. He fights for honor. He fights for friends. But he's also very quiet. He's actually pretty soft-spoken. And so, but his nature has this incredible impact on this people that is geared for war. And at one point in the story, he says he doesn't want to change his people's nature. He wants to change their purpose. So they don't fight to kill, but they fight to protect.
Right.
And
oh, wow.
So, and that idea was so cool. But teenagers will love the idea of, they're fighting for war, and they're so good at that. And adults can appreciate because he's trying to fight to protect people. And later he becomes a father, and his motivations are for his family. And so you've got these facets to the story, to a character that make it engaging from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to have to read that. That's very interesting.
It's one of my best. It's actually one of my highest rated books and series.
Which one was that?
That's Flesh of War.
Probably should just start from the beginning. Just read them all. But
you can. I wrote it so you could start at any point in the series. You could start. I actually had someone that read them out of order, and he sent me a message, and he was like, "I can't believe it. It was stunning. I realized later that it was out of order, but it was awesome." He really enjoyed it.
Now, Josh had mentioned. Are you working with Podium Publishing?
I am. Yeah. Yeah. They offered to buy my audio rights. 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago.
Because I bet you, well, I mean, probably all of these, but that sounds like that could be a pretty intense
Audiobook.
Yeah.
They are recording it this summer, that trilogy, and releasing, this fall. At least that's my understanding.
All right.
So how many, you talk about trilogies and several different characters. In this world, Luminea, is that right, Luminea?
Yeah.
You have different trilogies and
Good
different...
job, Josh. Gold star for Josh.
I win. And show. So, how are the trilogies based around different characters in the book, and do those characters interact with the people in the other trilogies, or?
Oh, excellent point. There's a lot of crossover. I wanted it to feel like you could read one series and go back and read the other, and they would feel like they're connected.
Right.
And there is one single plot thread that connects all of the series that I'll write, and will have a single massive conclusion. I can't give anything away about that, but it's I wanted there to be. Thank you. On a live broadcast.
Yeah.
I wanted it to feel like they were interconnected. So the Warsworn trilogy, the rock troll, his name is Triton, King Triton, and he is a side character in my original 3-book series. And in the prequel, where it's the mother's perspective, there's even like a 2-chapter where she comes in, and it's like this back moment in his life. And then when you read the Warsworn trilogy, you get these pieces that were in the original series, and they're part of his full story.
That's awesome.
It has this incredible blending, but it's from his perspective. So you see like the same event told from the other perspective, and it's these stories that like come together and then touch and then veer off.
Right.
But you see that interaction from the two sides, and there's so much dimension to it that on the one side you have no idea what's happening over here until you read this companion story, and then it's like you can see everything. It's really fun to write like that, and readers seem to really enjoy it. I've got a really high crossover. I think from one series to the next, it's like 60 to 70% that read one series and move on.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah, so it's really high.
Well, I mean, I can tell from your enthusiasm and what you've laid out so far that you would have to be on top of all your details and your spreadsheets and your planning and stuff like that. So do you use any specific tools that you like?
Pretty much Excel. Although I had a creative background, I grew up with a dad that was a big entrepreneur, and I had a ton of conversations. I grew up doing construction with him, so I learned a lot of logical, business aspects. I learned Excel and everything from him, and what that has created is I actually have a pretty decent balance of the creative writing and the the business mind.
Getting stuff done.
Yeah, so I use Excel extensively for spreadsheets, for tracking my sales. I heard you like statistics. I use statistics a lot.
I do.
Scott creates a spreadsheet for his spreadsheets.
It's more of a if you read the War of Art.
The War of Art?
The War of Art. It's I can't remember who wrote it. We've talked about it before, but it's a book on the creative process, and there's a term there called resistance, and it's when things you do to kind of spreadsheets for me can be my resistance, where I should be finishing a story, but instead I'm going to make a 15-part spreadsheet on my workout I did 6 weeks ago that I don't care about anymore, But anyway,
funny.
That's
mine. I use it to track my sales. I know what percentage I have going from one book to the next, to a sequel, to a series. I know how many sales I need to get in book one to achieve certain sales across a series, just everything.
That's cool. And do you use Scrivener or Word or Google Docs?
I did a lot of Word when I was doing my psychology degree, and now in my master's program, so I'm really comfortable with it. I know a lot of the ins and outs, so it helps me.
What type of master's are you going for?
Professional writing.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, that's very cool. I want to dive into the business aspect, but before we switch gears from the creative side of it, I want to ask one or two questions about it. Number one, you said you came up with the story trying to go to sleep. Did it start out as a fantasy story, and have you always been a fan of fantasy?
I've always enjoyed fantasy, but I like fantasy that is really driven. I like storylines that are compelling, that really progress forward. There's a few exceptions to that, but in my opinion, you've got a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum, you've got really, really fast-paced story that
Right.
you lose a lot of detail. And on the other end, you've got hyper-detailed, and the story's really slow-paced. And
Right.
I'm not quite in the middle. I'm a little bit towards the fast-paced. I don't want to sacrifice so much detail that you just, you move through and you never get a sense of imagery or scene or anything. A good example on the detailed end would be Lord of the Rings. It's extremely detailed, but it's actually a really slow-paced story.
Right.
It's actually hard to read. A couple of it is harder to read.
It is, but it's because it's so detailed. It's very slow, and not to discourage that or disparage it. But that's just the way that it's written. And I do like things a little bit more motivated. So I read a lot of fantasy growing up. I played fantasy games. Really enjoyed just, I don't know, like the fantastical nature of them and the whole idea of magic and, what if it was real and all that. That was really fun for me. So I did enjoy that, and that did translate into a lot of the stories and the outlining that I did over the course of 15 years.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that it spans a timeline of 50,000 years, which is...
Eventually, it will. Yeah.
Eventually. So you start out as fantasy. Is it going to continue to be fantasy for that span of time, or is it going to morph into contemporary or science fiction?
Yeah, so my original series and the Warsworn the Rock Troll trilogy that I did are about the same time frame and takes place 10,000 years before modern-day Earth.
Okay.
And the series that takes place in modern-day Earth is called the White Mage Saga, and it's a quilogy. It's 5 books, plus a novella.
I like that word, quilogy. I like that.
Okay, so I have to admit that I invented it because I really hated... I'd written a 4-book series, and someone tried to tell me it was a quadrilogy. And I thought that was absolute crap. So I was like, I'm going to call this a qualogy, and a 5-book series a quilogy. And
I'm going to write that down.
I started using it without saying I had invented it. And like 2 years later, someone came back and used it to me to describe their 4-book series.
You're like, now I'm making progress.
That's
like,
my
yeah,
word, and you're going to need to
let's
pay
add
me
words
for
to
that.
the dictionary. That's the best. So I really like
Changing the
qualogy.
language.
Right? Let's do this. That's what writers do. So
Yeah.
qualogy and quilogy. So this series is quilogy. It's quite epic, and it's modern-day Earth, where a girl who initially is comparable to Harry Potter in that she doesn't know she has magic, and then she learns that she has magic and goes to a magic school. But that's kind of where the extent of the Harry Potter parallels. And I actually had a review on Audible say, what's the thing that's most important about this book? And they said, not like Harry Potter, is what they said.
There's a lot of love for Harry Potter out there. I love Harry Potter. I've read the
Me too.
series twice all the way through. But there is an astonishing level of people that cannot stand the book.
If it's too similar. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people tried to cash in on that and tried to write several Harry Potter knockoffs. And I think they tried to do the same thing with Twilight too. But
True.
it's kind of the bad way to ride the market.
For what I did, this character is exceptionally powerful. She learns to fly. She learns to control. She is an oracle, so she can control every type of magic. And so she's very powerful, and so she's stepping into this world that there's a lot of expectations on her because of who she is. But what I wanted to explore in that is it's a setting where magic is in hiding. Anyone that can do magic, it's like this hidden world within Earth. And over the 10,000-year time frame, magic has drifted out, and so now it's become myth and legend among everyone else that isn't magical. And so the cool thing here is that it's not written from just one perspective. Throughout the series, there's perspectives that are people that have magic, people that don't. One is a Navy SEAL, and how he reacts in the military to magic becoming public knowledge, and how he has to deal with that in a military perspective because the antagonist is threatening not just the magical community, but the non-magical community. Everyone brings magic public and then tries to conquer it.
Oh, wow.
And so the antagonist is it's one of the best antagonists that I've written. They are phenomenal. And so I wanted to explore this. One is a convict. One of the characters' points of view is a convict initially in a prison. And I looked up and found an actual Russian prison that's considered one of the worst in the world.
Yeah.
And I use it as the basis for where this convict starts their story, is in this prison, and it's enormous fun because you get to see this world evolve from what it looks like modern day Earth, and in some respects it's like an apocalyptic book because the antagonist is threatening the globe and everything. But across 5 books, you see how the magical, community, the non-magical people, how everyone starts to react to it, how people start to unite under a single banner to fight this, and so it's a really cool, like, integrated storyline and
very high stakes and
very cool.
high stakes and long-term stakes with
which is why
so.
it's not really like Harry Potter because it's much more global and there's a whole lot of points of view.
How many of those damn mudbloods?
Right.
This is very interesting to me, this whole idea of having several series in the same universe. I've got an idea for several books that I've been planning that are going to be all written in the same universe. The question that I had that kind of relates to that type of writing is, is there any fear in going to different genres of losing fans? So you start out as fantasy and epic fantasy, and then you move into like a modern, maybe postmodern end of world thing, and then eventually you're maybe going to get to
like a science fiction
setting. I know that Brandon Sanderson's done it with his Mistborn stuff, but do you see or have any fear that you're going to either lose fans or turn people off as you gradually kind of morph into the different settings?
I'm sure I will. I'm sure that some readers will like my epic fantasy and not care for the modern. I'm sure, Anne McCaffrey has these great, the Dragon Riders of Pern, and then she's got these prequel series that take place thousands of years or like hundreds of years before when, the people are coming to Pern and dragons don't exist yet. And there's a lot of people I've talked to online that say they like the fantasy ones, they don't like the prequels, or vice versa. And that's okay. When you're writing a story, trying to appeal to everyone is a fast way for, getting discouraged.
You can't make everybody happy all the time.
Well, correct. I guess it works both ways too, because the people that don't like your modern stuff that want to stay with your fantasy stuff, maybe those people like the modern and don't want to read the fantasy. I think I said that right.
I think the most important thing is that you write from a point of passion, that you're excited about it. And I love the story that I'm writing. I love how it connects. I love how big it gets. I love how many subtle connections I've written that so few people have caught. And then they message me and they're like, oh, I caught this, and what happens here? And I'm so excited that they caught it. So I love doing that. So writing from a point of passion is exciting. Creating layers below layers that exist for the sole purpose of when someone goes back and reads the book a second time, they're like, oh, it does mention this in advance, and I had no idea.
Right. That's when you know you got a loyal reader when they're reading your books multiple times.
Exactly.
And that's got to make you feel good.
Oh, it feels great. I got a message from a guy named Thor Valder, which I'm going to use his name in the book, so you guys can't steal it. So he's a man that is in Iceland, and he was like, I love your books. They're so much fun. And he was asking questions that made it clear he'd read it more than once. He had all these insights, and he was like, I want to know what happens here and here. I think... No, it was a different guy that said, I would even sign a confidentiality agreement for you to tell me the answers to these questions. That's awesome. Like, making that connection with readers is amazing. Now, I will say
cool.
And some of those readers are going to look forward to all the places your story's going, and they'll probably go right with you all the way to the end.
Yeah. I will say that I've had a lot of crossover. So I had one, actually, perfect example is one of my beta readers. He doesn't like modern fantasy books. He's from England, and he's never read Harry Potter. So, like, the only one I've ever met that hasn't read Harry Potter.
It's a rebel. He's a rebel.
I know. He refuses to.
Yeah.
But he doesn't care for modern fantasy books. And initially, he was kind of apprehensive. He's like, I'll read your books because I've been your beta reader and I've read your earlier work. And he loves my second series, the one in Modern Day Earth. He's like, it's so engaging and it's awesome and it's so multifaceted. He's really enjoyed it. And that I consider a high compliment. If I can take someone who doesn't necessarily enjoy a certain genre and the story's engaging and in-depth enough that they come out feeling like, man, it was great and I loved it and I can't wait for more, that's huge. My editor originally had never really read fantasy. And so she edited my first book and she was making corrections like, this isn't how you spell Elven. Or this and I'm like, actually, that's really common in fantasy books.
Oh, yeah.
And she was a huge fan from the beginning, even though to this day she doesn't read fantasy, but she loves my books.
Right.
That's fantastic.
Well, and I don't know if this might be jumping way off track, but how do you find good editors and things? Because I write in fantasy and sci-fi and urban fantasy and different things. Sometimes you can tell your editors. I mean, I have a good editor that I like, but I don't think that my genre is her first choice if I hadn't done this editor stuff.
All right, so I'm glad you asked that because I get asked that a lot. How do you find the services you need? And Josh and I talked about this yesterday. I get the questions all the time. How do you get a good cover? Beta reader? You know what? I want information. I just can't find it. They don't even know it, but what they need is a coach. They need a book coach or a publishing coach or a writing coach. Mm-hmm. They don't have that. And I grew really discouraged because I didn't know anyone that had made it possible for people to find anything that they need in any sphere, any expert across the board. So I created a company with a partner called Snow Light Publishing, like a snow and a light in the snow.
Okay,
and
Snow Light Publishing, all right.
Snow Light Publishing is a company that brings answers to writers. So it's answers for writers. And the whole purpose is there's a blog that's all information that our experts post to, and there's posts on formatting and cover and how to work with an editor, and we'll do posts on traditional publishing. We want to make the blog so that any writer from any sphere can come and get answers just on the blog for free. And then we have a catalog of experts. So we've got editors, cover designers, beta readers, literary attorney, screenplay coach, all in one place. And I wanted to make it so that you could browse through and pick and choose the things you need. And ultimately, I'd like to get to the point that we have 4 or 5 editors, and you can go through and be like, oh, this editor does this, and you know what, I need this. I want to make it so that anything you need is there.
Maybe like a place to find beta readers and things like that even.
Exactly.
Now, is this something that you're in development, or you've already started, or, I mean, could we go there right now and look at the site, or this is my next question?
Sorry, hold on just one second. What?
I got some family coming home too. So my kids are coming home, so you'll probably hear them stomping around.
No, it's fine. I just had to answer a question. Just a minute, okay. I'll be done in like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Yeah.
Scott, I think I can answer your question.
Yeah.
Snow Light Publishing is up. I looked at the website last night, and I made the comment to Ben that it was nice because it didn't look like a snowlightpublishing.com.
I know I said I wasn't going to type on this, but I want to look that up real quick. I'm sorry.
I looked at it and I thought it was nice because it doesn't look like a 90s throwback website.
You did say that. You did say that.
It looks like actually a nice setup.
Oh yeah, that's
website that you look at it and you're like, oh, I like this, and instead of going and saying, well, this website looks like they did it in the 90s and it's just a billboard with different things.
I just took a quick glance at it before I came back, and that's pretty slick. I like that a lot.
So those of you that missed it the first time, it's snowlightpublishing.com. We'll put the link to that in the show notes and then the YouTube channel notes.
Well, and we wanted to make it, I mean, a lot of us are writers too, and so I wanted to make it, like if you click on our team and scroll down our team and click on someone, you can see, we put in like aspects of us that are just like who we are. So, like Michael is my partner, and so he's an attorney, he's an entrepreneur, and he's a root beer connoisseur.
Root beer.
He loves different root beers. Like he'll go out of his way to get, crazy root beer flavors, and I'm a snowboarder, and so we put these facets on here because we're normal people. We like interesting things. So all of us have an aspect on our biography of who we are. That's just a fun thing.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I could do some root beer. My kids are pretty big on root beer. I'm not sure they're connoisseurs. I think they might just be mass consumers.
Maybe.
I am a huge consumer of root beer floats.
Oh, root beer floats are good stuff. You're making me want a root beer float. The important thing with Snow Light Publishing is ultimately I want to make it a place that authors can go to find any answer they need. If it's information, if you want to publish on your own, great. Get the information, publish on your own. If you want to get a service and do it quicker, great. Whatever you need, ultimately I'd like to do it. And possibly in the long term, becoming an indie publishing press and helping people do it for them. Depending on the circumstances, I'm not sure. But I wanted to set it up so that anyone that needed stuff, it was in one place instead of scattered across the internet. I need this, and I can't find it all.
We waste a lot of time looking for those answers, and a lot of times you don't even always find the best answer. You kind of find the answer that's good enough to get you by. And
Yeah.
I wish I had some of the hours and days back Googling on how to set up a table of contents in Scrivener or whatever until Josh told me how to do it, and then I was
That's
okay.
so frustrating. And the funny thing about that is sometimes it feels like you're playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which I still don't know the answer.
I don't know
Yeah,
either. I played
think
that
there
game
is.
for months and months, and I'm not even sure. I think I found her, but it was an accident.
But you still, like, that's what it feels like when you're looking for things that you need, like an
Right.
editor or a cover designer. It just feels like you're searching for something that's, you have no idea. And then you start the search over if you need a formatter or if you need a coach. Like, it's so complicated. I want to, demystify that. And the truth is when you boil down indie publishing, so shifting away from, we were talking about the creative side and you talk about indie publishing. Indie publishing is an industry now. And becoming an indie author, you're an entrepreneur in an industry that is complicated and convoluted with misinformation and old information and people that claim they're experts and have no idea what they're doing.
And it's
so
constantly
really
changing.
It is, and that makes it really hard to make smart business decisions. Really, really hard. And I wanted to make.
I like that you mentioned the business side of it. We talked just briefly yesterday about the business side of it. Scott and I, for the viewers that don't know or that saw it on the feed, we went to a writers' conference 2 weeks ago in Oklahoma, and 95% of those writers didn't want anything to do with the business side of anything. They wanted just to create, and they wanted to be artists, and they waited for the muse.
They wanted to suffer for their art.
Right. And what I think is a lot of them miss the point. And it's fine if you want to be an artist, be an artist. But if you want to make a living with your writing and you want to be successful, you have to know the business and you have to treat it like a business.
I think you should be able to make a living about something that you're passionate about and that brings something to other people, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And so this idea that indie writers or anyway, that it's not a business is dumb, because I would like to do both. I would like to enjoy my work and work.
I think part of the problem is it's twofold. First is there's a distinction between amateur and professional writers. And it's perfectly fine to be an amateur. Or let's not even say writer, let's say artist.
Right.
An amateur artist. That's perfectly fine. You can paint, you can write, you can draw, like you can do anything that you want to do. Whatever you want to do, and that's perfectly fine. If you want to take it and make it a profession, then it's there's a huge gap between that two, and to bridge that gap requires knowledge, training, experience, effort, sweat, money, blood. Whatever you want to say, there's a huge effort that goes between the two. And when I was a kid, anytime I told my dad, I don't know how to do that, my dad's response was always the same. So you need to learn. It was never an excuse to say, I don't know how.
Right.
And right now, you meet writers that want to make it a professional career, and they say, but I don't know how to do that. And their response, what they're really saying is, I'm not going to learn that. I'm not going to.
Don't bother me with that.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. The problem is that if you're going to make indie writing a career, and frankly, it's more viable than traditional publishing.
Absolutely. I agree.
If you're going to make it a career, it requires the effort to learn. It requires that effort. And sometimes that's discouraging, and sometimes that's depressing, and all writers feel that. But overcoming that is what makes you a professional.
Well, and once you learn it, you know it. It's like riding a bike. You get on there, and it takes you maybe a couple weeks to do it without falling down and skinning your knee. But once you know it, the basics are there. Like once you know how to format, once you know how to use Scrivener to make a Mobi file or an EPUB file, or for instance, Scott just got turned on to BookFunnel, using that service to provide free books to people. Once you learn the ins and outs of it, it's super easy to do. It might take a little bit, like formatting takes a little while to do, which is
mind-numbingly dull until you do.
Yeah, but once you learn it, formatting is formatting. It doesn't change.
It's background noise.
Right.
What I usually say. Yeah, go ahead. what I usually say about anything with the indie publishing, if you're going to accomplish any of this, is it comes down to you start here and you want to get to here, and how you reach this. So if you want to be a national bestseller, that's up here. You're here. If you want to get to here, what that comes down to is you learn an aspect like formatting, and it's like building this foundation. And then once that becomes easy, you add something new, and that becomes easy, and then this becomes easy, and that becomes easy. And you know, writers. I know a writer that consistently writes 500 words a day. Phenomenal. You got a good base, you got a good foundation, and then push that. Try to push it up to 1,000, and then up to 1,500 and 2,000, until you're writing, you know, 2-3 books a year.
Yeah.
And once you build on that foundation and keep building and building and building, suddenly you look down and you've got this massive structure underneath you. And all of it, you know, was challenging every step, but when you look down, all of that has now become easy for you.
Right.
And
then you can look for the next challenge.
And then you go for the next challenge. Never be satisfied with, you know, where you're at, and just say, I want to push it further, I want to push it further.
So you mentioned you sold 100,000 copies of your book, and talking about building that foundation and doing those layers. Writing the book and formatting and all that is all well and good. How did you get to the 100,000 sales? Can you tell us about your marketing? Can you give us a little bit of, you know, your first numbers to your numbers now?
Yes. Okay. So I told you yesterday, I'm a big fan of people sharing tangible numbers.
Right.
It makes a difference. It allows people to know what to expect, know what to plan for, know what to strive for. I don't normally post detailed information simply because it's much harder. People can misconstrue that and think, oh, they're just bragging or they're saying this. And so in settings like this, I'm totally comfortable, and so I'll answer any questions you guys have about numbers or statistics or sales or whatever. And so I'll be really transparent. Now, that being said, to reach the number that I did, it came down to a few key elements. The first is that I recognized that marketing is an evolution. It's not one thing. So when you start out and you have one book, the marketing tools that are viable for you are enormously different, or if you've got 10 books or 20 or 30.
Right.
Or even 3 or 4. One series, once it's complete, your marketing plan evolves, it changes. And so recognizing that from the get-go, it's not that you're trying to figure out what another author did, you're trying to figure out what an author did that's at the same level.
Right. That's a good point.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when I set out, I tracked everything. I tracked every sale, I tracked every promotion. I wanted to see when I would do free promotions, what was the impact on sales? When I gave giveaways, what was the impact? If I gave away ARC copies, if I sought reviews, if I won a contest, if I won an award, what was the impact on sales? Everything was what was the impact on sales, and more importantly than sales, and I find very few people talk about this, but your ranking. What was the impact on your ranking?
Right.
You're talking your book ranking or your author ranking?
Book ranking.
Okay.
So I tracked all of that. I wanted to see if I had 2,000 free downloads, how many sales went on to book 2? How many of those statistically went on to book 3 or 4 or went on to another series? Tracking all of that. And so I would do a promotion, and I would test it, and I would read the result, and then I would do another promotion and read its result, and do another promotion and read its result. And then to go back and say, well, 2 of these 5 worked. Let's do both of them together and see its impact. So that's the second thing, is that I tracked every result. And so I can look back and say, clearly, this worked, this didn't, this worked partially. This one is room for improvement. This one I should try again. I know very clearly, and it's not based on a perception of how many people commented. It's tangible, actual results. So that's the second thing. The third thing, sorry, this gets detailed.
No, you're fine. This is good information.
The third thing is that I recognized very early that there's one promotion that every author has that is the biggest promotion you can possibly do that affects your long-term sales, and that's a book release. Nothing compares with a book release. A book release impacts your current sales because obviously you have a new book on the market, impacts future sales because one book is going to impact another book, especially if you've got embedded live links. And in the long term, you have created a permanent revenue stream. Small or big, it is a permanent revenue stream.
Right.
It's another point for both marketing and people to find you. So I geared all of my marketing efforts around my book releases. I planned when those book releases were going to happen. I graduated those marketing efforts from 1, 2, or 3 in a year. So my marketing plan is all wrapped around book releases and how to make the writing occur. So if people ask me how I market and I answer, I write 3,000 words a day, and they look at me like they have no idea what I'm talking about. But I write 3,000 words a day so that I can write 3 books in a year and publish 3 books in a year. And in the long term, huh?
Oh, no, go ahead. I do have a question, but go ahead. About
in the long term, if I publish 3 books a year over the course of, let's say, 10 years, I'll have 30 books. If someone else does 1 book a year and uses all the rest of their time marketing, they might sell a little bit more initially, but in 10 years' time and they have 10 and I have 30 books, my marketing efforts at that point are way bigger.
I've seen people like that. When I first started a few years ago, and there's a couple of people I met online, and they're still pushing the same book they were pushing 3 years ago, and they just have the 1 book.
Well, and if you do that, I mean, that's really hard. That means that you've got an old product, 1 product. Mm-hmm. It would be like trying to advertise a business that has 1 product and 1 product only. It makes it hard to do giveaways. It makes it hard. You're not expanding. You're not growing. And that's fine. If you've only got the 1 book and that's all you have in you, great. More power to you.
And but if you want the way to do it, it's going to be harder, I think.
It is. It's much harder. For me, I have found that consistently writing, consistently publishing is the best marketing plan I can do. Everything else is geared towards that.
That's excellent.
What are your numbers? When you first released your first book, did you do? A lot of people wait until they have like the trilogy done and then do 1 book a month or 1 book every couple of months for the release to catch that Amazon algorithm to take it up. Did you just release your first book and then just keep writing after that, or how was that plan, the initial plan for just starting out?
So I had 3 books written, and I published them approximately 90 days apart. In my experience, especially with Amazon rewards you in the first 30, 60, 90 days. Beyond 90 days, you're fending for yourself. You're already old, unless you've got something relevant that's going to help that stay relevant. So I published 3 titles of a trilogy that were all interconnected, branded, that I had invested $4,000 into cover design and editing before I published the first one.
Wow.
And then I published 3 in 6 months. So I published in June, October, and then December. And that was a big reason of why it did well. So it was the publishing. I had 3 prepared things, and if I could write quick enough at that point, I would have written them and then published them. Now I can write and publish 3 books in a year, but then I didn't have that ability.
It seems like you had the strategy down before you even went to Amazon with your writing, and it's fantastic to know that somebody could do that before. Like when I first published I published a short story and then I published a novel. I really had no idea what I was doing other than I knew how to format the book. I didn't know anything about the algorithms. I didn't know anything about how. Where did you? I mean, you had this idea. You told your wife you're white.
I spent 4 months, 2 hours a day doing research.
Wow.
Before I published my first book. Now I had the flexibility to do that. I already had my 3 books done. I was working with cover designers and stuff like that, but in reality, I had the time. My business gave me flexible hours, and so I did that. I did a tremendous amount of research.
So you came into indie publishing knowing you wanted to indie publish it. There wasn't any, should I traditional publish or should I indie publish? You knew
I'd already gone through that. I'd already gone through that. I sent out a few query letters, and then when I heard about e-publishing and the ability to control it myself, I was like, let's jump on this. This sounds great. But I did a lot of research, and a lot of it was wasted time. I mean, out of all of it, you can condense all of the knowledge I gained in that 4 months, frankly, in the first year, into about 12 hours. And that's what the coaches at Snowlight Publishing do. If you're inclined to learn it quick, learn what's right, how to maximize your keywords, how to, use the, proofing tool on Amazon. Should you go wide release or Amazon exclusive? That kind of stuff, it can take you hours and hours to figure it out. Or
during your research, 2 hours a day and what like that, how long did it take before you're like, I've read this before, because I've read 15 books on marketing, and now I get to the point where it just is like stabbing myself in the face to read another one, because it feels like and you read the whole book for the one little
no,
nugget.
for the one nugget of information.
Right.
You're describing the point that you reach when you know enough material that you hit about the 80% mark, 90% mark, where you know 80% of the information, 90% of the information is out there, which means it's very hard to get that last 10%.
Right.
I hit that point, let's see, I did research for 4 months, I published in June, I hit that point in September. And I was still doing research, just couldn't find new information, couldn't find anything that was relevant. I mean, it was occasional, like one little piece here, but it just wasn't groundbreaking anymore.
You get your hopes up, you see a new blog, you're like, this is going to be it, I'm so excited, this blog is going to light it. No, it's just it's the same thing.
It's just nothing. So at that point, I stopped doing consistent research. That stopped being part of my plan. And I started going to in-person events because I realized that I'd done as much as I could from my cave. From like, this is all I can learn from my cave. But I realized that for me to learn more, I had to go to sources. I need to get more. And so I went into in-person events. I did my first book signing. I joined a meetup group of other indie writers. And I went through a phase that I learned as much as I could. And then when I started going to like book signings, major events like UtopiaCon, like Smarter Artist Summit, although I would say that's more for advanced writers, PennCon, Indie Book Fest, I mean, these kinds of things. I didn't go into it to try to sell books. I mean, you spend hundreds of dollars to go to it. I went in trying to meet authors I could learn from. That were a couple steps ahead of me that I could say, wow, you're doing great, you know this, and I could just learn from them.
Right.
That's really where, once you hit, research fatigue, I'll call it, then...
God, that's another good word.
You're just knocking them out of the park today. Well, it's everything you've talked to us about, it seems like, has all been very intentional and kind of a work ethic, and with a long-term goal plus the immediate work, the day-to-day work plus a long-term goal. And I really want to ask this question because it's driving me crazy. But you talked about writing 3,000 words a day. And this goes back to your process. So if you write 3,000 words a day, then how does that work with editing? So
excellent question. So when I'm writing this year, I should backtrack slightly and say that my first year when I was writing, I tried to write 1,000 words a day. And each year I've pushed that, and I've pushed that. So my goal this year is 3,000 words a day. And that's going really good. I've been able to maintain an average of 2850, I think, 2846, I think is my average. That goes back to my statistical averages. So I record my word count every day, so I know exactly what's happening, and I know, okay, I'm progressing this. This is how much time it takes for me to do it. If I maintain that average, it takes me about 8 weeks, give or take 7 weeks, to write one book, one draft. Right. In an editing phase, it comes down to page count. So my book might be 350 pages. My draft I want to finish in 7 days, so it comes out to be around 65, 70 pages a day. So in my editing, it's the same thing. It's the same level of progress. I need to edit 70 pages a day.
Do you edit while you're also producing new words, I guess?
No.
No. So when you edit. When you write, you write.
Correct. And that's one of the... When I first started writing, clear back at the beginning, my wife encouraged me to write, and I started writing Elsirian. I wrote the prologue, and I had my wife read it, and then I edited it, and then I had my wife read it, and then I wrote chapter 1. And because it changed the prologue, I went back to the prologue and edited it, and then I had my wife read it again. And then I wrote chapter 2. And this process took so much time, and I remember my wife saying, I'm getting really tired of reading it. I love your work, but I'm getting tired of reading this prologue. She read it like, I don't know, 12 times. And so that's when I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to go through and write, and if the story changes when I go back, I'll fix it.
Right.
And that was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I learned later that that's, I guess, a really good advice to give a new writer is don't worry about what you've written before. Just keep pushing forward. What I do now is I have a very, like you said, intentional editing. It's an intentional editing process.
Use a style sheet or some things like that?
No, actually, each draft has a purpose. Okay. So draft 0 is an outline. Draft 1 is the first draft. Draft 2 is content. So sometimes I'll skip whole chapters because I don't know what's going to happen there, and I'll just keep writing. And then draft 2, I go back in and fill in any holes or gaps. A chapter wasn't quite filled out enough. and I'll just fill in content. I don't worry about everything else. I might fix normal stuff. Obviously, if I come across a typo, I fix it, but it's content. Draft 3 is an alpha reader. Draft 4 is a character building. So at this point, I go back, and based on the alpha reader's feedback, I'll go through and work on character development. Still fleshing out details here, but the story's really taking shape, and now I'm working on characters. Then draft 5 is an editor. Draft 6 is post-editor. And it keeps going through. I could go into detail on all of them, but it finishes out at draft 13 is a vocal draft where I read it out loud to myself. It's gone through beta readers, editors, and then I format it and upload, and that's my final draft. And so each draft has a purpose. It helps me not get tired of reading my same content again and again, which we all get to, honestly.
How long does it take to go from draft 0 outlining to draft 13 publishing for you?
Draft 1 takes me 7 weeks. So writing the book takes 7 weeks. The editing phase from draft 2 to 13 takes 5 weeks of work on my part, a week for an editor, and a week for beta readers. So it's 7 weeks, but I do other projects while the editor has it and while the beta readers have it.
Right. So it's a good overlap between.
It is.
And I'm assuming by this point you have beta readers. I mean, editors, I mean, they're on the clock. They're getting paid, so you should be able to predict how long it takes them to get it back to you. But my experience with beta readers is, you give somebody, and I don't have a ton of beta readers, and you might give somebody your book, and you might get it back 6 months later, and that's not going to work for my schedule. So
nope, I give them a week. I give them a week, and then I incorporate their thoughts and comments, and that's it. Sometimes they come back later and then I'll add them in later. But realistically, by the time I give it to beta readers, the story's really clean. It's really good. Right. It's gone through an alpha reader editor, and it's on like draft 8. So it's already pretty clean. At that point, they're looking for typos, inconsistencies, and I can correct those even up to a vocal draft before I publish. But I will say my beta readers, initially, I probably had over 30 people that read my book in advance, and that boiled down to about 6 that were quality. That give me good feedback. They get it done in about a week, and they don't tell me, "Oh, I love your book. It's so good." Any feedback? No, I can't think of anything.
Yeah,
you're not doing your job as a beta reader if you don't tell the author his work sucks.
Right.
Well, we're coming up on the hour, and it has flown by. Let me tell you.
I can go in a few minutes. So if you guys, I don't know if you want to stick with the hour, but if you want to keep talking, I'm happy. I know you had more questions you wanted to ask. So
Scott, do you have any other questions?
I do, and I'm going back to all my little notes. It's been kind of a whirlwind tour of Ben Hale's writing process. So.
Sorry.
No, this has been great because I've got a lot of interesting information that you articulate that have been trying to put to word but didn't have the right to do it. So thank you for that. That's great.
No problem.
So like for advice for writers, it's kind of a general, and you've already covered quite a bit of that. But I know there's been a lot of talk lately about writing to market and things of that nature. Is that something that you have an opinion on, or?
I don't recommend writing for a particular market. It removes the passion out of it, and readers can feel it. Writing is a medium to convey emotion, to evoke emotion. And if there's no emotion when you write it, there's not going to be emotion when someone reads it. It's just not there. People can feel it. And writing from a point of passion ultimately is more marketable than writing to the market.
Right.
But go ahead.
I was going to say, so I know that, like, and we've talked about this already too, but like Stephen King in his book on writing, he talks about he's an organic writer, however you call it, and he says that if he's not surprised by the story, then nobody else is. Well, what I kind of get from some of what we've talked about today is if you're not entertaining yourself, you're not going to entertain your readers. And so, I mean, your stories are a great example of that. I mean, I'm terribly excited. I'm a little bit daunted that now I got 40 books to look forward to. Just add 40 books to the 500. I'm already behind.
I tell you, just on your description of Luminea and how you've created and cross-connected characters, just off that description alone, I'm interested to go and read the books.
Thank you.
And that I like that you're so excited about a project. When Scott and I get together and talk about our stories, sometimes we both our energy is like it goes through the roof, and then But it's good to see that other authors are just as crazy as us when it
Yeah,
comes
well,
to.
that's what makes it fun. That makes the creative side fun.
So we
And
mentioned you've been writing since 2012.
that's when I published first. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the one thing, knowing everything that you know now about spending all those hours doing research, writing 13 novels, what's the one thing that pops into your mind that a new author just starting out will give themselves a great leg up if they do this one thing, and it'll help them start their career? What do you think that would be?
If you don't mind, I'll give you 3.
Okay.
So number 1 is know yourself. This sounds like it's the simplest thing, but it's actually really hard. You want to know, can you maintain writing 500 words a day? Or is it 1,000? Or is it 200? Is it 50? Know what you are capable of. Know your writing process. So I went through my writing process. I've got 13 drafts. I know how long it takes me. You asked me how long, how many weeks. I know exactly how long each draft takes me, how many days it should take me. I know the writing, how many words I can do per day, how many hours it takes me to do that. When writers start out as an amateur position and they don't know how many words they can do, they wait for inspiration to come to them and they don't know. And
Right.
if you want to make it a profession, you have to take that and turn it into something you can quantify, namely time. How much time and energy does it take for you to write 1,000 words?
Right.
Because then you can extrapolate 50,000 words, 100,000 words, 1,000,000 words. You know how much time it takes you to do that. What's your editing process? Do you have it figured out? Know yourself. Know how you work as a writer. Once you know that, that's tremendous power. Because then you can say, I'm here. I want to get here. I know how to get there. I need to
Yeah.
fix this and this and this. Know yourself.
If you can measure it, you can improve it.
Exactly. And the problem is when you start out as an amateur writer, you can't measure it. I mean, how do you measure it?
Right.
So knowing yourself is the first thing. Number 2, know your next step. So a lot of writers start out and they look at someone that's really successful and they say, that's where I want to be. And they don't realize that they're thinking that is their next step. They want to get from point A to point B, and they don't realize that it's A to Z. And they don't look at what's point B. So, like for me, when I was going to e-publish, I looked at it and said, I want to e-publish. I don't know how. I want to earn a living from my books, but I broke it down to what's my next step. My next step is I need to know what I'm doing. So I did my research. That was my next step. And then what's my next step beyond that? Publish a book that's branded. And then what's my next step beyond that? Plan my book releases. So know yourself and know your next step. If you're writing 1,500 words a day, what's your next step? Write 2,000 words a day. If you're publishing 1 book a year and struggling with that, try to get comfortable with that. I mean, know what your next step is going to be. Know the next thing to learn. Know the next group of people you want to interact with. Once you know those 2 elements alone, you can climb any ladder. So those are the first 2.
That's awesome.
Those are awesome. So I can't wait for number 3.
Okay, so...
Wait for a dramatic pause. Wait.
Okay.
Drum roll.
Number 3, go.
Number 3. The most important aspect that you can gain as a writer is courage.
Oh.
Courage to write what you believe in, courage to overcome when you get a bad review, courage to overcome doubt when you meet an author and they're, 10 steps ahead of you and you think I can never get there. The most important attribute you can develop is courage. C.S. Lewis once said that courage isn't just one of the virtues, it is the aspect of every virtue at its testing point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is incredibly profound.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And that's what it comes down to as writers, is that we are in a setting that is so volatile and so easy to get discouraged and writer's block. And I have writer's block probably 30 times a day. And I totally and categorically get stuck. I have no idea where to go. And the courage to say, I can overcome this is the greatest attribute that you can gain as a writer, is courage. And it's so funny, but that's really what it boils down to. If you know yourself, know where you want to get to, and have the courage to go, there's nothing that can stop you.
And
That's
you gotta keep. And the courage is you're gonna have better and worse days on the courage spectrum.
Exactly.
Depending on what you're facing.
You will, and that's why it's such a difficult virtue, or writing at its testing point, we'll call it, is courage. And when you gain it, it's incredible, and you'll always feel like you don't quite have it. It's very elusive. It's ephemeral. It comes and it goes. But if you're always striving for it, then it's stunning what you can do. This year I'm trying to write 4 books, not 3. And the 4th book I don't have time to edit it, but I want to write a 4th book. I'm pushing it. I'm saying I think I can do this, and even with a master's degree and 5 kids, I'm going for it, and I'm pushing it, and I'm striving for something that I don't believe I necessarily can do, but I'm trying to have the courage that I can do it.
And even if you don't do it, just having the courage to do it, or don't finish rather, that's what makes the difference between a professional writer or someone that really, really, really wants to do this versus someone that doesn't. Because someone that doesn't have the courage to even start, they're not, it's the journey of 1,000 miles starts with 1 step.
Yeah.
If you think there's no way I can write 4 books in a year, so I'm just not going to try, then you're not going to have anything. But if you say I can do 4 books and then you only get 3, it's not a failure because you still have 3 books.
Exactly. And the funny thing about when you're starting out, courage is sitting down at your computer and writing 1 word, and then writing another one and another one. Courage is taking your idea and putting it on paper, and that's where courage begins as a writer. And it's so hard, and you keep pushing, and you keep pushing, and you keep pushing, and there's so many things that sap it from you. But if you take that, it's incredible. Like if you understand that principle, then you take those 3 there, you can do anything. A perfect example, Scott, and you experienced this, is when I was at Smarter Artist Summit. I went into that event knowing 1 single person. 1. I didn't know anyone. It was a person who invited me. And it was from Podium Publishing, who is incredible, but I knew James going into the event.
Right.
And so I said, you know what, I want to meet as many people as I can. Now I naturally...
And you did.
I did, but the point of that is that I went in trying to meet and memorize names, know people. I wanted to know who people were, make connections. On a business side, I wanted to make as many connections to open doors. On a personal side, I just like meeting people and wanted to meet as many new people as I could. And I woke up on day 2, and I was like, you know what? I think I've met like 70 or 80 people. I can know their names. I was reviewing in my mind, thinking of their faces, and I was like, I know a lot. And the thought crossed my mind was like, I think you could go for all of them. Now, the idea of memorizing 70 people's names in 1 day, you've already known 80 people, that is daunting. I mean, that's like crazy. But it comes down to the courage, and I've been developing my writer courage for a few years, and so, but that was a massive stretch for me. I'll be honest, I was really challenging, and I wasn't sure I could do it.
And then you got called to the carpet to test it publicly, because that didn't take any courage at all.
I did, but
150 people.
But that comes down to courage, and that demonstration, that single event. So that moment of courage has opened doors all over the place.
Oh yeah,
that's so awesome.
And I did 150 people in front, naming everyone's name, and I knew who they were. It wasn't just like names, but that moment of courage opens doors. But that same principle, courage opens doors, applies early in the writing process. If you write a chapter, it opens doors. Now you've got more ideas. Now you can write 2 or 3 or 4. Courage opens doors, and when you understand that, it pushes you from one step to the next, and suddenly you look back and you've gone a long way.
Well, I can tell you, if I ever have the lack of motivation to start writing in the morning, all I'm going to do is play the last 5 minutes back of this interview. Because now I don't want to do anything but go and write now. So thanks, you've ruined my whole day. Because I've got a barbecue and drink beer this afternoon, and I had not planned on writing, but now I want to write more than drink beer.
Now you got to write the whole day. Well, we might have to make that a little, copy it off, make it a little side segment of that or something, and put that up there. But the courage that you're talking about, and I see it with you, everything you described today, Ben, and watching you there at the Smarter Artist, it allows you to go back to that intentional type of intentional living and writing and creative. And so I think for you to, a lot of people are like, well, how does he do that with those names? And what I realize is you don't remember somebody's name unless you're paying attention to them. And
Right.
talking to you there is that was immediately apparent that you were engaged. You weren't playing with your phone while you're talking to me or somebody else. And that's a unique skill in today's society. So
I really come to value how I was raised. My mom was sick growing up, and so I grew up in a home that I worked a lot with my dad. My dad had grown up on a farm, and he felt we should work like we grew up on a farm. And
Right.
I did. I cooked, I cleaned, I did dishes, and I did construction full-time over the summer in 6th grade.
yeah.
I worked a lot, and I learned that everything is intentional. Everything. When I first got a smartphone, I had games on my phone, and they were distracting. And I realized that they were distracting, and so intentionally, I deleted the games from my phone because I recognized them as a distraction.
Yeah.
And
Josh,
that's what
isn't that Josh why you went to the IMAX and the
Yeah, I
Apples?
did.
You
I
have a
did
similar
the
story.
exact same thing. I used to be a huge PC gamer.
Oh, yeah.
I intentionally built computers to play the games on the maximum resolution and get the greatest experience out of it. But when Scott and I first got together back in 2012, and I've always been writing. I've been writing my whole life, but it's always been, I'll write a chapter, and then 6 months later I'll write another page or create a character or whatever. It was never a professional thing that I would sit down and force myself to do, or not force, but to do intentionally.
You're suffering for your art.
Yeah. But then I started to realize I would sit down to write and then open up a game, and I'd play a game for 7 hours and not realize what I was doing.
Yeah.
And
I'm a gamer, I know.
yeah. Well, it's you get that dopamine dump, and you're like, oh, I did one more level, and I'm good, like Candy Crush. But so I got rid of that computer. I sold my PC game computer to a friend of mine and bought a Mac, specifically because Macs are not known for having great access to games.
Yeah.
So I bought a Mac because I wanted to write. If I was going to sit down in front of a computer, I wanted to write.
So Josh, right there, it was your moment of courage that opened doors for you.
Right, and it has. And I've got this show now, and we've got several books out between us.
Yeah.
And it's the start. We're still starting. We're still on our way up. Our show's just beginning, and I think it's going to go great places. And just by talking to you today has given me a lot of motivation, a lot of inspiration to go and continue to do the things that we're doing. And I hope for the viewers that we had watching live, we've had a few, and for the people that watch this or listen to this on the podcast, I know that they're going to be inspired just by listening to you.
Yeah, this is a great episode, and Ben, I hope that you'll be willing to come back on the show at some point, either on one
of course.
shows or because I think that we could go on lots of different topics for quite a while. We can dig pretty deep into some of these.
I'm sure we could.
So
I'm gonna have to break free because I got to go to work. But,
yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it up. But Ben, it's been great to have you on the show. I'm very glad that you agreed to come on.
No problem. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We will touch base with you here after a while. Hang out for a minute after we stop the broadcast.
Okay. Before we go, do you want to? Something we've been doing is you want to hit on the Snowlight Publishing, where we can find Ben's books and things like that.
Yeah. So Ben's books are at Amazon.com. You can search for Ben Hale. Do you have a website other than Snowlight Publishing that you want to know about?
Yes, my personal author website is luminea.com. And I'll message you so that you can put it in your comments below if people are interested.
Absolutely. And people can find you on Facebook. Are you on Twitter at all?
I am on Twitter, but not very regularly.
Yeah, neither am I.
But I'll send you just my information, so my website, my Facebook, and stuff, so you can just post all that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on. This has been an episode of Live with Ben Hale. I am Josh Hayes, here with my co-host Scott Moon. We've had Ben Hale on the show. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
See y'all later.
Take it easy.